Welcome to the Secure Start podcast, brought to you by the Secure Start Aura apps, supporting trauma-informed care and practice at home and in school.
But at the Cotswold Community, that wasn't the case. She was brought in by Richard Balboni primarily to work with the staff teams to really develop their therapeutic skills directly. The other reason, my guess is, that Richard Balboni brought her in was that he knew that she was very clear in her thinking. She was a strong person. She was a definite person. She was not afraid to tackle difficulties and resistances in staff teams. She had the kind of strength of character and the strength of purpose to really make it clear to those people, look, you either got to come with me and change or go. There is no half measures. You can't just sit on the fence and not really be supportive of this sort of therapeutic work. She really also encouraged people to become more self-aware. That was a key part of developing sort of therapeutic skills, that you needed to know what belonged to you and what belonged to others. Working at a place like the Cotswold Community, she almost equated it to having a psychoanalysis, because you just knew that almost every bit of yourself was going to become exposed sooner or later. Quite a significant number of people who worked there went on to train as psychotherapists. A general sense of containment is crucial for therapeutic work to take place. I think there's a really important place for that, in any organisation, to have a consultant that comes into work primarily with the staff team, and to have that sounding board with somebody who's tuned into the task, but is actually outside of it as well.
It was, well received, got lots of good comments, and it brought you out of retirement.
Yes, well, yes, mixed blessing that is. But it's funny, being retired now for 12 years or more, for 10 of those years, nobody bothered to contact me about anything. And suddenly it's all happened. I feel like one of those old, not that I liken myself to a rock star, but I feel like one of those old rock stars who's suddenly being asked to sort of plays hit tunes again,
Yeah. Well, sorry about that. Welcome to the Secure Start podcast. I'm Colby Pearce, and rejoining me for this episode is another former leader in the UK therapeutic communities and foster care sector. Before I introduce my guests, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands I come to you from, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge the continuing connection the living Kaurna people feel to land, waters, culture and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. My guest this episode, some would say, of course, is John Whitwell. For those of you who haven't seen episode 2 yet, John was formerly a UK registered psychotherapist and full member of the British Psychotherapy Foundation. John was also the Chair of Trustees of the Gloucestershire Counselling Service and also a trustee of the Planned Environment Therapy Trust and the Mulberry Bush. Between 1985 and 1999, John was the principal at the Cotswold Community, a pioneering therapeutic community for emotionally unintegrated boys. Thereafter, between 1999 and 2014, John was the Managing Director of Integrated Services Program, or ISP, the first therapeutic foster care program in the UK. I recorded this podcast interview with John a week ago, and it seems fitting to share it in the week that marks the first anniversary of the Secure Start podcast. I also note that we somewhat drew John out of retirement a year ago when we recorded that podcast. So, welcome back to the podcast, John. It's a real pleasure to have you back, and particularly talking about this topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, no, well, I'm pleased to be back with you and continue the discussion.
Yes, yes. So, um, what we're going to focus on a bit now is, or in this podcast, is Barbara Docker-Drysdale. Now, Barbara, I just referred to her as Barbara, but my understanding is that she was referred to in different ways in
Yes,
different contexts.
she was.
Yeah. Well, tell us what your
Okay,
recollection of that was.
all right. Well, to her close friends and very close colleagues, um, she was known as Pip.
Right.
That was her pet name, her pet family name, and
Yep.
a few people used that, including myself at the time when after I'd sort of been working with her for a few years. But most of the people at the Cotswold community, the boys referred to her as this, and also most of the staff as Mrs. D.
Mm.
Um, I can never recall her being referred to as Barbara. Um, and and Dockar-Drysdale is obviously potentially quite a mouthful when you're sort of
Mm.
repeatedly over and over again. So Mrs. And interestingly, when the conference that there was recently about her, I found myself being in a bit of a conflict as to how I should refer to her, because after 25 or more years since I knew her and worked with her, referring to her as Pip just didn't feel quite right. So I found myself referring to her as Mrs. D, and probably will do today as well. I mean, it's kind of an easy point of reference, really.
Yes, of course, as I've mentioned in the intro, pre-recorded intro, I'm getting very organised now. Um, uh, I mentioned that she was the founder with her husband of the Mulberry Bush, and I've had Richard Rollinson on a couple of times, and he refers to her as Mrs. D as well in our conversations. I have heard her referred to as Barbara Docker and Barbara Docker-Drysdale. I think, yeah, in different contexts. So,
Yes.
yeah, she kept the mystery going a bit at the time.
Yeah, her maiden name actually was Gordon.
Oh,
Her,
really?
her father was professor of surgery at Trinity College in Dublin, and
Right.
he was Thomas Gordon.
Mm.
And but yeah, so Dockar-Drysdale was very much her husband's fault, because at first I thought one of them would be Docker and the other would be Drysdale, and they
Yes,
combined it. No, it wasn't. He obviously was a Dockar-Drysdale, and
yes.
she took that name when they married.
Well, not to sound frivolous, but no one called her Mrs. D squared for the two Ds. No, it's a different time, I guess. Yeah.
Sometimes I do sometimes write Mrs. DD,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's,
Aye. And of course, like when we last spoke, podcast number two, will be 42, this one, when it comes out. But when we last spoke, we talked about how, well, you spoke of how she was the initial consultant, I guess, to the Cotswold community after it became a therapeutic community for unintegrated boys.
yes.
Is my memory correct around that?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, Richard Balbirnie started the transformation at the Cotswold community in 1967,
Mm,
and he called on quite a few people to help him initially, um, because he was pretty well connected, and he obviously, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but my imagination tells me that when he was an educational psychologist,
mm,
um, in Oxfordshire, that's how he came into contact with Mrs. Drysdale at the Mulberry Bush. And my guess is
mm,
that she even used him as an educational psychologist in her work there. Um,
mm.
so it was probably quite natural for him to think of calling on her to help out because I don't think she joined really till about 1969. So it was a year or two into the transformation process.
Mm.
And he, she was appointed as the consultant psychotherapist, primarily to work with the staff teams. And that's the big difference because
Mm.
I think obviously at the Mulberry Bush, she was very hands-on with all the children there
Mm.
and was a central person to it, both as a therapist and somebody who was right there in the middle of it. But at the Cotswold Community, that wasn't the case. She was brought in by Richard Balbirnie primarily to work with the staff teams to really develop their therapeutic skills directly.
Mm.
So in a sense, her work with the children at the Cotswold Community was by proxy, and
Mm.
she did occasionally see one of the boys there, but that was probably when she was asked to, specifically when we were really quite puzzled by something and
Mm.
thought it probably needed her expertise to help us unravel our own
Mm.
thinking. But
Mm.
that wasn't very often. But yeah, and I think the other reason my guess is that Richard Balbirnie brought her in was that he knew that she was very clear in her thinking. She was a strong person. She was a definite person. She was not afraid to tackle difficulties with and resistances in staff teams. And and Richard Balbirnie had an awful lot of that to deal with because
Mm.
he didn't have the luxury of closing the Cotswold Community and reopening it with a new staff team and
Mm.
new children brought in. He had to make the changes on the hoof, and the resistance that he met initially was huge.
Mm.
And Mrs. Drysdale refers to it quite a lot in because she had the sense that people thought that what she was proposing was by some people
Mm.
was quite bonkers, and that actually if they just kept quiet long enough, it would all they would all disappear and it would all go back to
Mm.
how it was. I mean,
Mm.
that was a sort of underlying feeling from quite a number of people. And then
Mm.
gradually, I mean, she had the kind of strength of character and the strength of purpose to really make it clear to those people, look, you either got to come with me and change or go. There is no half
Mm.
measures. You can't just sit on the fence and not really be supportive of this sort of therapeutic work.
Mm.
And I sometimes wonder, with all the kind of difference in the sort of regulations and the HR procedures and so on. I mean, I wonder how that would all go down nowadays. Maybe it would be a bit tougher thing to do than it was then in the late 60s, early 70s.
Perhaps we'll come back to that.
Yeah,
What I drew from what you just said then is, or a little bit earlier, was that she wasn't doing the work for the staff. She was helping the
yeah,
staff, training the staff, supporting the staff to do the therapeutic work
yeah,
themselves.
yeah, very much so. That and you know she would she had weekly meetings with all the staff teams. I mean, there were four households, four group living households, and then there was also the school. She met with each of the household teams once a week, and she met with the school staff once a week as well. And so, and though those members of the school staff that were involved with a particular household were also joined that meeting as well. Um, so she had really regular contact, and not only that, she would have enough time to see individual staff members, not every week, but maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. You'd get a chance to
Mm.
have an individual session with her. So she had a good sort of sense of what was really going on and where the support was needed.
It sounds like she was there she was there a significant
Yeah.
length of time each week, long
Two,
enough to do all of those things.
yeah, 2 to 3 days a week,
Mm.
depending on it varied a bit from time to time, but yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, she worked for quite short periods of time. I mean, unlike most psychotherapists, probably who would think, well, a team meeting should be at least an hour and a half. I mean, hers was shorter than that. They
Mm.
could be under an hour,
Mm.
and that suited her style because I mean, she was quite quick to reach a to reach some advice. I mean, a lot of the time that she spent in those team meetings were going through need assessments that were done. The staff team had the responsibility of going through a need assessment, and this was
Mm.
following a format that she developed at the Mulberry Bush. And if anybody really wants to see what that's like, there is a paper on my website which she wrote, which is available, and just look under Barbara Docker-Drysdale and need assessments, you can find it. But it goes through the various stages in the need assessment and what people, what the teams were asked to consider. And then she would review that need assessment with the team together and come to a conclusion about what's the nature of the treatment plan. And then every few months that would be reviewed and updated and so on. That was quite a key part of the nature of her consultancy.
And I would also say, hearing you talk about the work that she did as a consultant, I wonder how that compared to other therapeutic communities in the UK at the time. And also, look, I can tell you, I have been myself been a consultant to a therapeutic caregiving program. In fact, more than one. And I would love to have had 2 to 3 days a week. I was lucky to have had half a day a fortnight or a day a month um, with those. So that's quite a difference in terms of the amount of time spent with that she had at that time.
Yeah, and I suppose it links to the fact that she decided to step away from the mulberry bush at about that time. I mean, the mulberry bush was going through its own sort of evolution because obviously when she and her husband, Stephen, who used to, by the way, while we're talking about names, was always referred to as Docker, when she and her husband were right in the thick of starting the mulberry bush and running it and being there, and then she sort of stepped back partially from that to become the therapeutic advisor rather than involved in the day-to-day management as well. And then, of course, when somebody came in to run the mulberry bush, and she was gradually pulling away from the central part of the mulberry bush, and I suppose that was the time when Richard Balbirnie approached her. So she really had pretty much all her time she could devote that she wished to the Cotswold community. So we were very fortunate in that. There weren't necessarily going to be so many people around anyway of her ability and experience who could, even if we wished to, have devoted that amount of time.
What struck you about her when you went to the Cotswold community and met her, and as you got to know her, I wonder also how you thought she was different to other therapeutic or leaders in the sector at that time.
I mean, I mean, she was just so clear in her thinking. I mean, she'd obviously had all those years of working things out at the mulberry bush. I mean, it was very. I should start in another place actually. When I was researching for this conference about her work a few weeks ago, I came across a really interesting obituary written by Chris Bedell. And Chris Bedell was a senior lecturer at Bristol University in the advanced social work course there. I was fortunate enough to do that course with him, so I got to know him well. But he was also very involved with the Mulberry Bush Trade. He was part of the sort of managing committee of the Mulberry Bush for quite a few years. And when he wrote her oration when she was awarded an honorary degree at Bristol University. But he kind of referred to her history in how she got into the work and how she started during the war years running a playgroup in her village. And then people started to notice that she was particularly good with troubled children, very young children. She understood them. She had a way with them. They gravitated towards her. And that reputation grew. And so not only was it with the evacuee children, but other children as well, including some older children who were referred to. I mean, she was asked to help, and it was that sort of reputation which led the Home Office and the government at the time to encourage her and her husband to start the Mulberry Bush. So her background wasn't, and I mean, Crispy Dell in his obituary likened her to people who gained a lot of valuable experience during the war years. Bowlby was one, Anna Freud, and Winnicott. He made the key difference was that they were already psychoanalysts. She was starting off as a mum, and that so her experience was grounded in actually doing the work with children, and it kind of gave her. I'm not suggesting that the other people weren't authentic. Of course, they were very much so, but they gave her an authenticity with people, particularly in the residential work sector, who kind of sensed that she knew where they were coming from, that she knew instinctively their struggles, and while she didn't necessarily collude with that and just say, "Oh, poor old you, we can," I mean, she nevertheless kind of did give you that sense of, okay, I understand this, and this is how I kind of recommend that you think about this in a maybe in a slightly in a different way. So I think that was one of the things that I personally valued about her when I encountered her. That and I think that was one of the reasons why she was also different to. You asked what differences there might have been with other therapeutic communities. To have someone like her uh, really guiding the therapeutic work of the community was quite really unusual. I mean, I know that I mean, there are so many different styles of therapeutic community. It's kind of different to make a comparison. I mean, the Mulberry Bush and the Cotswold Community were fairly different in the sense that of actually having sort of treatment programs for so-called emotionally unintegrated children. I mean, that that wasn't terminology which was particularly widespread around the whole of the sector of therapeutic communities at all. And and some of the therapeutic communities tended to work mainly in large groups as well and have large group meetings, which again wasn't the characteristic of the Mulberry Bush or the Cotswold community. Um, so, yeah, I think that was a really important part of appreciating what she had to offer, really, um, which I think was very different from many other places.
I think you've hit on something that I think is really important when you talked about how the staff she was coming to the work as a mum, rather than as a person with a professional qualification, and I think that as you referred to authentic, and I think unless you're in the work, and I've found this over my career, that that not just staff in residential care, children's residential care, but across the sector as well, they do bring with them this idea that if you haven't done the work, then how would you know? How would you, why would you, why should we stop and listen to you? You get something similar in schools as well. If you're a consultant to a school, you're asked in to talk about the work in a school. Often you'll meet that resistance. What can be resistance? It can just be also skepticism of the worth of your input if you haven't done the work yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And of course, the other thing which I think led to that sense of authenticity was that, and Winnicott refers to the fact that he referred children to her to have therapeutic care, and she actually took some children into her own home, her own
Mm.
home. So you could say she was a kind of very experienced therapeutic foster carer before even people began to think of it like that.
Mm.
And the reason that she had them in her own home, that she was helping to manage their regression, because that wasn't something that could easily be done in once or twice a week therapy. And Winnicott knew that. He referred to the need for some patients needing therapeutic management, not just therapy. And by that, I understand that he meant they needed their day-to-day, they needed 24-hour care. They needed somebody who was not just thinking of 1 or 2 hours a week, and was able to support that young person through a regress period of their life if they needed to regress in order to then later progress. So that again was something that we all knew she'd done that, and so she deserved to be really listened to and taken notice of.
Yeah.
Mind you, she would make sure she was listened to as well. I mean, she had a very direct and almost didactic style, which again is not that usual in a lot of psychotherapists, if I may say so, and probably wouldn't even be. Well, how can I say? Probably some people would worry about that style, but I mean, in the circumstances that we were in at the Cotswold Community, it was exactly what we needed.
Yeah. Tell us more about that. Tell us more about that style.
Well, I mean, to give you one example, I mean, it's a sort of partly amusing, but it's actually happened. And Patrick Tomlinson reminded me of it recently, and that is that she was very keen that we read about the work, and particularly Winnicott's work, and also some of her own papers, and she would recommend others as well. And now and again, she would test out what we were reading. So she would ask us straight out, "What are you reading now?" And word would go round all the staff teams that Mrs. D is focusing on reading. So everybody's starting making sure they were reading something. But I mean, she kind of she knew how to crack the whip sometimes with and she also ran a weekly training group for staff, where people from the different households would come together, and they were given a paper to read. They were expected to read it and come and discuss it and refer to their own examples in their work and so on. And that again was a great privilege to have that because we had to face the fact that most of the people coming into the work, or certainly at the Cotswold Community, were not qualified therapists by any means.
No.
They were often certainly for the group living households, they would be mainly in their early to mid-20s. They'd probably shown a great interest in children in different ways, but they needed and great empathy, and they had qualities that we were looking for, but those qualities needed to be developed to work therapeutically, and that's where the sort of training program was as important, also alongside the kind of week in, week out supervision that she was providing as well. And it was quite amazing to see how young teams, when you looked on paper, they say, well, they haven't got a vast amount of experience, but actually the kind of quality of the work could be quite extraordinary, and the enthusiasm that people could have. They weren't burnt out, people who'd been in the work too long. They had a lot of enthusiasm and identified with the work, with the primary task. They understood that. And well, in fact, they came to work at the community because they heard about the primary task. They visited and saw it and had a feeling that they really wished to do that, which again was a good place to start. That at least the people coming in, at the very least, wanted to do that work, or they imagined that they wanted to do it. Obviously, they would be confronted probably by more difficulties than they probably even imagined would be there. But nevertheless, they had that drive initially, which was really important.
There's a couple of things that I want to just pick up on. One is that a previous guest on the podcast, Megan Corcoran, said something I thought that was really profound, which was that you don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that has come up, a theme that has come up multiple times through the various podcasts, has been the issue of alignment, consistency and alignment
Yeah.
in a service. And um, um, I think Tom Ellison in particular talked very persuasively about the importance of a primary task. And it sounds like uh, no matter where they came from, there was this shared alignment, but this shared commitment to the primary task of the Cotswold community.
Yeah, one of the other really important consultancies that we had, and this again is through the connections that Richard Balbirnie had, was with the
Mm,
Tavistock Institute.
yeah.
And again, on my website, you can see a whole series of working notes. And the first two were done by a well-known person in that field of the Tavistock Institute, A.K. Rice, Ken Rice. He's actually there's an A.K. Rice Institute,
Mm,
um, which has been developed in the USA. And he set out a framework for the community, defining the primary task and explaining what the primary task was. And that was back in, say, 1968. Um, it wasn't realized then, at the time when
no.
he wrote that the majority of the children that we'd be working with would be emotionally unintegrated children,
Mm,
because it only became clear probably over the next couple of years that that was going to be a shift in the primary task.
mm,
Um, and again, that also linked to Barbara Docker-Drysdale's work too,
yeah.
um, having an influence on that. But the primary task was that then, unfortunately, Ken Rice died after only writing two working notes, and then that was taken up and taken on by Isabel Menzies-Lythe, who then
Mm,
wrote quite a number more of those. And again, she was another person absolutely focused on the primary task and continuously sort of pushing that into our thinking. Um, and that's where I had
mm,
those examples of where, you know, everybody, whatever their role is, had to have that understanding of the primary task. They
mm,
may not be working directly with children. They could be somebody who's one of the
yeah.
admin staff and having to deal, but nevertheless, they were having to deal with phone calls or something like that. And
Mm,
they needed to not just be irritated by something that was getting in their way or something that was stopping them writing something or typing something, understand that the primary task was the dominant, and it was quite
mm,
legitimate for them to put something aside in order to support the primary task.
yeah. Tell us, I mean, people we've been talking about the primary task, but just perhaps tell us what the primary task was as delivered at that time.
Well, the definition of the primary task, which Ken Rice and Isabel Menzies-Lythe, and then later Eric Miller always used to sort of state to us, it's that task which has to be performed in order to survive. So that
Mm,
if you didn't perform it, you would go out of business. And I mean,
hmm
that what was clear to us that our primary task was to
mm,
treat and develop seriously emotionally damaged children who were referred to us.
mm,
And the language was different then. Again, in thinking about this podcast today, I was thinking, so quite a lot of the language has changed. I
mm,
mean, I probably still think of emotionally damaged children where now it's kind of trauma-informed practice
mm,
and other words which weren't really available in about. And we used to talk about severely emotionally deprived children,
mm,
um, and now, and there weren't many children that would have been referred to as autistic.
mm,
Uh, there wasn't really in the thinking then. the autistic spectrum.
Mm.
And probably, if truth be told, probably there could have been quite a number of boys that we were working with who'd be now defined as being on your autistic spectrum.
Mm.
So yeah, those were some sort of really quite, I think, significant differences at the time.
Mm.
I'm talking about in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. I think what I'm hearing is that she spent, shouldn't refer to her as she. It's again, there are some things that change, and there are some things that remain the same. And referring to someone as she is still probably ill-mannered of me. But I'm not sure what to call her. But Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale, it sounds like she had a structure that she followed in terms of the meetings, the supervision, the training that was delivered on a weekly basis. Not all of those things weekly, I don't think, but was delivered as part of her 2 to 3 days a week when she was at the Cotswold Community. And the importance of supervision in this sector has been brought up again and again through these podcasts. And as I said earlier, this will be podcast 42 when it comes out. So, what do you think was her views? What do you think was Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale's views around supervision and the place and importance of it, and what she expected staff to, I guess, input to it and get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, she saw herself, probably she would have seen herself probably as primarily a consultant rather than as a supervisor. Although I think what she was providing was actually supervision.
Mm.
Um, she would expect people to bring to her things that they were worried about. Um, she didn't. She would be naturally worried if people only wanted to kind of bring their good stories that
Mm.
showed how great they were in their work. She knew how difficult the work was and
Mm.
wanted to help with people, and hoped and expected that people would really share their real sort of dilemmas, the things that probably kept them awake at night. Um, and I think she really also encouraged people to become more self-aware. That was a
Mm.
that was a key part of developing sort of therapeutic skills, that you needed to know what belonged to you and what belonged to others.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds so easy and trite to say it like that, but we all know that it's a really hard won process. And she used to talk about working at a place like the Cotswold Community. She almost equated it to having a psychoanalysis,
Mm-hmm.
because you just knew that almost every bit of yourself was going to become exposed sooner or later.
Mm.
Um, that a lot of the children were experts at doing this. As one of their defences was to to spot all the adults' weaknesses. Um, and over a period of time, this was you were going to really feel as though you were put through it, and you needed to be as use it as a positive to become more and more self-aware.
Yeah.
Um, and only then you could begin to understand what was you and what wasn't you. What
Mm.
what you if you had a feeling of something, you could, if you knew yourself well enough, you could be sure as to whether this was coming from the child or whether it was something that was being
Mm.
stirred in you, and what that was about. And that's such a kind of an important kind of skill to develop. I mean, obviously, psychotherapists, that's partly why they go through such rigorous training, because that's a sort of cornerstone of psychotherapeutic work, to understand yourself well enough to know what's you and what isn't you. Um,
Mm.
So, but that was available to staff at the Cotswold Community through that sort of supervisory consultation process. And I think it's not insignificant that a large proportion of, well, quite a significant number of people who work there went on to train as psychotherapists. Um, and people like Patrick, who you know well, Graham Kerridge, who you also did a podcast with, who worked at the community. I mean, and there'd be many others who even if they weren't directly involved in therapeutic work, would nevertheless refer back to that time as being very formative in their thinking, and that I think is down to that sense of developing your own kind of self-awareness and beginning to be challenged and challenge yourself about that.
Yeah, there's so much to kind of pick up on. One thing that an insight that comes to me is that especially working in this sector and coming to the sector, as you talked about earlier, coming to the role with a genuine interest in providing a therapeutic experience for children and young people is going to attract people, I guess, that are relatively sensitive to others and indeed empathic, who will feel for them. It's that feeling for the kids that often it's referred to perhaps at times as projective identification in psychoanalytic terms, but that feeling for others, I think, as you say, it's really important to know what's yours and what's theirs. But it's somewhat ironical that the nature of people who are attracted to this role are probably a bit more vulnerable in a sense, or likely to take on those projected feelings and experiences of others.
Yes, yes, I think that's true. Interestingly, we went through. Patrick will be able to speak at some depth about this because he was very much involved in doing the defense mechanism test at the Cotswold Community,
Yep.
because we used to be we wanted staff to stay at least 3 years with us to provide enough continuity for the work. We really wanted staff to stay at least to sort of see through their work with a child, beginning and a middle and an end to it. And that didn't always happen, sadly. I mean, I'd like to think, majority of people did, and some stayed a good deal longer. But then we began to sort of try and understand what were we missing. Why did we thought this person was going to be great, and yet they weren't able to see it through. And so we sought the help of a person called Olya Karlali, who'd been studying the defense mechanism test. It was developed in Sweden, so I understand, for looking at Swedish air pilots in their air force who, under stress, were missing some vital information in their cockpit, leading to disasters. So the defense mechanism test was designed to look at how people coped under stress and how they could see what was going on around them or not. I won't go into all the sort of details of that.
Sure.
But what it revealed was that sometimes the people who look the most brilliant and sparkle at the beginning haven't necessarily got the inner resilience, because as well as the empathy and that you're talking about, which does imply also some vulnerability. I agree with that, but you also, alongside that, need some resilience as well. And sometimes the most surprising people would have that resilience who didn't, on the surface, initially look as though they might. And so that was a very interesting. And again, Patrick Tomlinson, along with Olya Karlali, wrote 2 or 3 published papers about the defense mechanism test at the Cotswold Community. They're quite interesting reads, really, to look at the factors which gave people that tuning into children, but also that sense of resilience as well.
Yes, I know Patrick. He has the caste system, and he knows much more about this than I would anticipate to learn yet in my working life. But it's interesting, those two dimensions that you need both. You need both the sensitivity and the empathy that probably without the resilience, there is vulnerability there in relation to this work. And I want to link that back to supervision, and in particular, I wonder what Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale thought about the role of containment in supervision, whether she whether she whether she actively spoke about, talked about, practiced it, or whether she just did it. She was a good container, even though she may not directly be mindful of being that.
Well, she certainly understood the concept of containment, because that was a really
Mm,
crucial part of helping emotionally unintegrated children.
mm,
Um, and interestingly, she probably, I think she would have also acknowledged the fact that she needed some containment herself
yes.
in her work.
Yeah.
Um, because when you look at the mulberry bush and the way it started, the role of her husband working alongside her was crucial. And he did
Mm,
provide a kind of management cover within which she was able to do her work with the children.
mm,
And at the Cotswold Community, when she came in, I mean, she relied a lot on Richard Balbirnie providing that overall containment in the organisation,
mm,
um, providing a sense of safety within which she could do her work. Because, I mean, she knew, I mean, this would be, again, a difference, I suppose, because some therapists trying to do consultancy work haven't always had the support of the management of the organisation. And, and that can be a very tricky dynamic.
I know
Whereas
that very well.
Yeah, Mrs. Drysdale would have known that Richard Balbirnie would have been 100% behind her in the way she was working, and so there'd be no basic conflict there, and that would have been really really crucial to her sense of containment in the work that she was doing.
Mm,
So and she would say, I mean, again, something that comes to mind is she would say, look, you can't do therapy without management. I mean, basically saying that if the children are in complete chaos, then how is a therapist going to be able to work in a situation like that? There's got
mm,
to be some sense of containment. That doesn't mean to say everything's got to be all kind of calm and steady. Of course not. But it means that a general sense of containment um, is crucial for therapeutic work to take place. And
mm,
um, and so she would be support. She herself would be supportive of, say, the managers of the households, uh, other levels of management in the organisation to provide that for their staff teams as well. Um,
mm,
so yeah, she wouldn't probably have been particularly talking about containment of her work that she was giving, but you're right. I think instinctively it was, because going to
mm,
see as a team, you could be arriving on her doorstep feeling pretty either jaded or knocked about or overwhelmed, or and you felt that you were pretty sure that you were going to be helped to see some light at the end of the tunnel,
mm.
and and come away feeling better than you went in
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that consultancy,
Mm,
um, both as a team and as individuals as well.
mm,
Occasionally, it wouldn't always be like that, because sometimes she would pick up on things that were being missed. Well, I mean, to give you an example, I mean, there might have been a time when a team would be feeling very, I don't know, exasperated, frustrated, completely at a loss about a child. And there'd be a part of them in the team that would think, if only we could get rid of this child, everything would be all right.
mm,
And Mrs. Drysdale wouldn't play that game.
mm,
And she would push that back at people. And if there was a particularly difficult acting out from a child or a group, she would take the time to strip it back and look at what was being missed, because one of her basic tenets was acting out of children is usually down to a breakdown of communication, and if you agree with that, then the onus is on the grown-ups, the staff team, to look at where the onus is on them to be in good communication with the children, particularly those children who find it difficult to trust. You've got to meet them more than halfway in that case to get good communication. So again, you could go in there thinking, oh, if only Mrs. Drysdale would agree that this child's got to go. You'd come away thinking, she ain't going to play that game. And not only that, you could be somewhat chastised for missing something fundamental. And if only it would have been spotted earlier, you might not be in that position that you're in now. So that could be quite tough to take that on.
But staff would be expected, or otherwise would come back next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they would. Yeah, they would be expected to really take that on board.
Yeah, I was wondering how much of that is expectation, but versus how much of that is, well, you know, upon reflection, she has a point, and that was a useful conversation to have.
Well, yeah, I think people would get to that, but probably initially they might not. They might not see it entirely in that way. But then that was again the sense of containment in the organisation, because you'd have plenty of opportunity to talk it over. I mean, one of the advantages, I suppose, which we had then, and again that reflects the times that we were in, people worked very long hours, and an advantage in that was that you had time to reflect, to talk with each other. I mean, again, talking to people now working, it's quite difficult to get teams together to have team meetings and so on, because people are working different hours and much shorter working weeks. And while I can understand the importance of that and to help people not sort of get burnt out, nevertheless, it does make sometimes doing all that kind of work together as a team that which is also can be very rejuvenating. If you miss out on that, you're missing also a source of strength that can be there in working in a good team.
Yeah, I wondered about that, and I've kind of hinted at it a bit already in this conversation that I guess unless you work in the organisation, so you're more of an internal consultant or rather than an external consultant. So unless that is the case, I can't imagine that there are many organisations now that are having someone like Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale come in 2 to 3 days a week, every week, in support of the work of the organisation. And I wonder what she would make of that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think she would feel probably very frustrated by it. And I mean, having said what I said, I mean, when I went to the fostering organisation that I worked with at ISB, one of the things that I noticed there, they had a great team of therapists working there, but mainly working with individual children. But having learnt the model that I had at the Cotswold Community, I encouraged those therapists to also be part of team discussions, and to, even if they weren't, I mean, not, you know, only a percentage of children were actually seeing therapists for individual therapy anyway, but there were an awful lot who could have benefited from a therapist's input if only to support the carers. And that was a model that I took from the Cotswold Community and saw how that could be developed, you know, in a different setting. But I still think there's a really important place for that, for in any organisation, to have a consultant that comes into work primarily with the staff team, and to have that sounding board with somebody who's tuned into the task, but is actually outside of it as well. And yeah.
I agree. I agree very much so with the idea of having everyone in the organisation participate in the training, as you say, or the supervision or the meetings, as occurred at the Cotswold Community. And I remember your story from last time about the drivers at ISP
Yes.
and their misalignment with the primary task. And yeah, I think that again that's whether she would, whether Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale would lament it or otherwise. I suspect she would. But in this day and age uh, of scarcity of resources and a lot of pressure on organisations, service provider systems, um, supervision in reflective supervision and support in that way um, is not always delivered very well, if at all. I know I've had people on the podcast who do perform that role and in organisations, and I think that's great. But I particularly look at the large statutory authorities in Australia. They're state by state. In Ireland, it's TUSLA, the nationwide child protection authority. In the UK, it's the local authorities, and you talk about the importance of retention. The work we do this work at a cost. We give of ourselves all the time, and I think you said it's a bit like supervision needs the supervision experience, or at least the meeting with the consultant experience is a bit like psychoanalysis. It's a bit like therapy, and lots of people have likened it to that. And I think that's really a really important way to sustain people's energy levels and enthusiasm and capacity to continue to perform the work over a period of time rather than get burnt out and, if they can, leave and do something else.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, when I think about I referred earlier on to the way a staff team would work on the need assessment of a child and the importance of the whole team doing that together and everybody. And that would include, it wouldn't just include the the care workers. It could also include the person, some of the ancillary workers in the household, because
Mm,
what was really quite important was to get a complete picture of the child. And we know that children present different parts of themselves to different people. Um, and there might be a lot of doubts about this child's ability to learn and to function, only to find that actually with the gardener or with the cleaner or with one of the maintenance team, this child was showing quite different sorts of abilities, was actually much more tuned in to sort of practical skills than anything
mm,
sort of academic, for example. And it was
mm,
really important that that was fed into the need assessment. And if you didn't do that, you were missing something really quite important.
yeah.
And I'm not sure who said it, Beyond, or probably somebody who said, it takes a group to understand an individual because it's quite natural for us all to show different parts of ourselves to different people. Um, and that those going through need assessments together in a group like that was just such an amazing kind of learning experience
Mm,
and bringing the team together and and supporting one another because again the way emotionally unintegrated children um, would one of their defences, as we know, would be splitting process. And
mm,
I can remember when I first started out in the work, it was in a hostel for young people on probation.
mm,
Uh, if you were on the receiving end of negativity, it was other members of the team could easily think it's your lacking of ability that you're seen as the bad one or as the useless one or whereas if when in the need assessments uh, if someone was really having a hard time you could support them in that realizing that they were actually doing probably the most important therapeutic work having to deal with all this kind of stuff coming at them that
mm,
they were at the heart of the emotional disturbance,
mm,
rather than people who are being idealized and put on a pedestal and could do no wrong. And that may look like a very comfortable place to be, but it's actually, everyone knows it's not real. And so again, that way that a team can work together to support people in what role they're being given by the children, and not see it as some kind of lacking in them if they're having a hard time. That again comes out of, I think, the understanding through working on this with a consultant to help people just sometimes see that sort of wood for the trees.
Well, I think a hugely important role, and I'm really pleased to have had you back on the podcast to talk more about the consultant role, and in particular how it was embodied in Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale. So I think that's probably a good point to wind up our conversation today. John, it's night for you, and I've got a full day
Just the
ahead.
day for you starting.
Yeah, I think after I met with you last time, the first time, some other podcast guests, and other podcast guests introduced me to the fact that I was coming to them from the future, and I really liked that.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, so it's Monday for you, Tuesday for me, and but anyway, thank you very much again.
Allow me just to mention something before we stop completely. That I mean, the papers written by Barbara Docker-Drysdale are published in her books, but I don't think they're in print anymore. But there are several of her papers on my website which are completely free to access. So if anybody's really interested, because what we haven't really touched on today is the actual detail of the therapy. We've really been talking about her role more as consultant and so on, and how that worked, and that's been great. But I mean, somebody might be wanting to know more about the actual nature of the detailed nature of the therapy, and so I would encourage people to have a look at it, have a look at her papers that are available. There are at least half a dozen on there, which Oh, and the other thing, can I make a plug for one of Patrick's books?
Yes, of course you can.
This one. Don't know whether you can you read that?
Yeah. Therapeutic approaches in work with traumatized children and young people. Yep.
Patrick wrote this book after he left the Cotswold Community, because he had all the notes from a lot of the staff meetings with Mrs. Drysdale and the later consultant Paul Van Heeswick, and he brought them all together and wrote a book, and it really is a very, very detailed account of many aspects of the day-to-day therapeutic care, and really again would recommend that to anybody who wants to sort of go into that in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Very familiar myself with Patrick and the work that he does, and indeed we did talk about him a little bit last time about his role in formalising or the in-service training that was done there for staff at the Cotswolds. But yeah, again, thank you, John, and I mentioned this at the beginning before we started recording, that one of the interesting things about this podcast is we've almost brought some people out of retirement, but I think it's fair to say, and I must apologise on record, that we have almost done that with you too. So, but we very much welcome your experience, your wisdom and insights, and it's important that it's not lost.
I'm glad you gave me that jolt out of retirement to come and talk with you, because it has been an interesting and pleasurable experience. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.